All right, this is a video topic that has been requested a couple times now. I wanted to do this before the end of the regular season because, of course, I'm going to start focusing on the playoffs. And I want to talk about the Philadelphia 76ers, in particular, the 1966-67 Philadelphia 76ers. I remember when the Bulls were marching to the title in 1996, and there was much discussion about whether that team was the greatest individual team of all time. And I remember looking at different talk shows on ESPN. One of them in particular was Up Close. I think it was, where Wilt Chamberlain was on there. And when the topic came up about the Chicago Bulls, while he acknowledged that they were a great team, he didn't think that they were the greatest team of all time. Now, of course, at the time, how old was I? Maybe 15? 15. I knew about the 69 Lakers and the 33-game winning streak. And, when we grew up as a kid and looking at ESPN in the 1980s into the 1990s, you had at least some good historical knowledge of the game, sports, whether it be NFL or NBA or baseball, because they did have a much better balance on that back then, before they became just full-blown entertainment hype, And it's sad because when I talk to people now who are younger, they have absolutely no, unless they go out there and do it themselves, they have natural curiosity, they have no knowledge whatsoever of sports. And sometimes they say things in social media, in the comment section, that just makes you absolutely just baffled. How did this person function? How did this person... Well, anyway, going back to the point. I thought that Wilt was going to say the 69 Lakers. But to my surprise, he said the greatest team he ever saw was the 67 Philadelphia 76ers. Now, of course, Wilt is biased, because he played on that team. But still, I was curious about this so-called great team that Wilt was talking about. And I've read about him and tried to research about him. And ultimately, through the years, I've come away with the same deduction that they were the greatest individual NBA team of all time. Now, of course, this is subjective. This can't really be proven, who's the greatest individual team. It's opinion. Some people will tell you it's the 96 Chicago Bulls. Some people might tell you that it's the 87 Lakers. Some people might say it's the 86 Boston Celtics. Some people will say maybe it's the 2016 Golden State Warriors. But it's subjective, But Wilt does have a case. Now, Wilt is prone to hyperbole. He's prone to hyperbole. This is the same guy that claimed that he slept with 20,000 women, which I think is a gross exaggeration. Because Casanova claimed to have slept with 3,000 women, and even I remember reading something years ago about, what was that porn star's name? John Holmes. He claimed to have slept with 14,000 women, and this is a guy who was in the porn industry, and even he didn't sleep with as many women supposedly as Wilt Chamberlain. And what makes it weirder is that Wilt said he didn't lose his virginity until he was 15 years old. So I remember somebody did the numbers crunch, and they said that Wilt had to have averaged excuse my language expression, but they said Wilt had to have averaged 1.5 fucks per day by a different woman every day. A woman and a half, a new woman, fresh pussy, to have done that. And I remember reading an autobiography of his, of Wilt. And a couple of his teammates were saying that's impossible because there was too many days, too many nights where they saw Wilt go into his room at night with a big ass bag of McDonald's burgers and fries, and there was no woman accompanying him. He said, no, There's no way that Wilt slept with that many women. But whatever. Back to the point of the video, okay? Wilt was prone to hyperbole, but there were many people who agreed with what he said. There was a panel of experts during the 35th anniversary of the NBA back in the very early 1980s. And you had so many different teams to choose from as far as one great team. You had that Minneapolis Lakers dynasty of the early 1950s with George Mikan. They could have chosen one of those teams. Of course, they could have chosen one of the 11 championship Boston Celtics teams, preferably before 1965, because they started declining as a team, even though they did win a couple more titles. The Boston Celtics, they could have chosen one of those teams with Bill Russell, the greatest dynasty in NBA history. They could have chosen the 72 Lakers, who at that time had the most wins in NBA history. But they chose the 67 Philadelphia 76ers. So what made that team so special? Well, this is just my opinion. You come into that season, and Wilt Chamberlain is very motivated, a very motivated person. He just turned 30 years old. And while he was still young, he knew that the sand in the hourglass was now on the downside of his career. He was still in his prime, but he was getting toward the second half of his career, if you get what I'm saying. Bill Russell had just won 8 consecutive championships. And he has 9 overall. You have none. Individually, you've been brilliant. You've led the NBA in scoring every year since you've made your debut in the NBA. But you don't have postseason success. Coming into that season, Wilt averaged something like, for his career, he had a 39.5 career points per game scoring average, or something like that. 39.5 or 39.6. The most dominant scorer in NBA history. Matter of fact, I think his numbers were something like 39.6 points and 23 point something rebounds per game, or something like that. But he doesn't have the postseason success of Bill Russell. Dolph Schayes, the great Syracuse National star, of course the Philadelphia 76ers used to be the Syracuse Nationals. He was the coach of the team after he retired, but they fired him. And then come Alex Hannum. Now, Alex Hannum coached the St. Louis Hawks, who were the last team to beat the Boston Celtics in the finals. The last team to beat Boston, period, in 1958. And Alex Hannum had coached Wilt early in his career when Wilt was a member of the Philadelphia Warriors, who now were the San Francisco Warriors. And he encouraged Wilt to approach the game differently, to trust his teammates more, and not to be, he didn't specifically tell him to shoot less, but to focus more on other aspects of the game. And Wilt agreed to this. And Wilt had one of the most dominant seasons of his career. He didn't score as much as he had in the past, but his numbers speak for themselves. He shot, one benefit of it was that Wilt, knowing that he had fewer shot attempts, he was going to shoot the ball far less, he focused on getting high percentage shots, dunks and layups and whatnot. He scored primarily in the post. Wilt, when he was younger or earlier, had a fadeaway jumper, but he focused, like I said, on scoring more primarily in the paint. Shot 68.3% from the field, which was an all-time record until he broke that by shooting 72.7% from the floor as a member of the Los Angeles Lakers. but he averaged 24.3 points per game, I think, 24.3 rebounds, and he dished out 8 assists per game. And with those sheer numbers, Wilt won the regular season MVP. Now, of course, Wilt Chamberlain wasn't the only player on that team. You had, I think the guy named was Lucius Jackson, who was a 6'9", 250, 260-pound bruising power forward. Okay, so you had a very dominant front court with extremely strong men. Lucius Jackson, like I said, was built like a tank, and Wilt Chamberlain is the strongest NBA player in NBA history. So you have these bruisers up front. Then on that team, you had who else was on that team? I know you had, of course, Hal Greer, one of the great shooting guards in the NBA, one of the most underrated shooting guards in NBA history. Hal Greer went on to go on a tear during the playoffs, averaging 28 points per game throughout the entire postseason. You had Chet Walker, who was in his prime, Chet the Jet Walker, the first person that had a nickname, not Kenny Smith. But Chet the Jet Walker, known for his extreme slashing ability. Later on, when he was a member of the Chicago Bulls, he had set a scoring record of 56 points. But this was he was an older player. Of course, that record ultimately would be broken by Michael Jordan. But he was in his prime playing with the Philadelphia 76ers. And another weapon that they had, that Sixer team, was coming off the bench. They had a Hall of Famer. They already had Wilt Chamberlain, a future Hall of Famer, and Hal Greer, a future Hall of Famer at the time. You had a Hall of Famer come off the bench, Billy Cunningham, who ultimately would later become the coach of that team, famously coaching that team through the only other championship that the Philadelphia 76ers had during the 83 season. Well, of course, Julius Erving, Moses Malone, Mark Ivoroni, James Toney, Maurice Cheeks, that team. But anyway, you had Billy Cunningham, who was averaging fewer than 27 minutes a game, coming off the bench, putting up 18.5 points per game. Another thing that made this team unique was you hear a guy like LeBron James talk about how he need playmakers, and that they need playmakers at the point guard position. You heard that's a frequent thing that he was talking about. Well, this team had multiple playmakers at the position, at the point guard position. For one, they had Wally Jones. Wally Jones was a very talented player. Now, was he a Hall of Famer? No. But he was a very talented ball handler and distributor. Also on that team, they had veteran Larry Costello, who some people feel should be in the Hall of Fame. Now, Larry Costello was not in his prime anymore. I think ultimately that might have been his last season or next to last season. I think it was next to last season. But he wasn't what he once was, but still, he was solid. He provided veteran leadership. And also on that team, you had Matt Guokas. Now, Matt Guokas is probably known more this generation as a head coach for the Orlando Magic. I remember some years ago. Coached some other teams. He's also known as a color commentator. But that team was pretty loaded, man. And also at point guard position, they had Bill Mastroianni. So that was a very potent team. And they ultimately went on to average over 125 points per game, which is still one of the highest scoring averages of all time. And Wilt was also a prototype or precursor to the great passing big men that we would see later on in the NBA, like a Arvydas Sabonis or a Bill Walton. While Bill Russell would pass, the offense didn't flow through him, if you get what I'm saying. The offense always flowed through the machinations of a Bob Cousy. With Wilt, the offense flowed through him, being that he was such a dominant player. And the defense just focused on him. So he was a precursor to those guys. Like I said, an Arvydas Sabonis, a Bill Walton, who's another great passing big man. I guess a Tim Duncan would be up there too. But this team was tremendous. They roared through the postseason, absolutely just roared through the postseason, and they beat the Boston Celtics pretty easily. And during the NBA Finals, interestingly, they faced the San Francisco Warriors, which is Wilt's old team, and Wilt exacted revenge on his old club. I think they beat them in 6 games. I can't remember the exact spread, but they beat them, and they became only one of 2 teams to interrupt Bill Russell's nearly uninterrupted championship party during his career. But going back to this team, they went 68-13. Now, of course, you could make the argument, well, they don't have the best record. They don't have. How are they the best team? They don't have the best record. Well, this is the thing, and this is what Wilt would say. Back then, there were only 10 NBA teams. 10. Now, people would say, well, it's easy to pad your stats when you're only playing against 10 teams, but you got to look at it different ways. And I kind of agree with Wilt's assumption. By there only being 10 teams, think of it like this, guys. Instead of 30 teams right now that we got in the NBA, let's say the NBA just got rid of 20 ball clubs. All of those teams that aren't doing very well, the Kings and the Timberwolves and the Nets, all these teams that aren't doing jack shit, get rid of all of them. And we're just going to keep the 10 best NBA teams. Now, if you just keep the 10 best NBA teams, do you really think that Golden State would be winning 73 games? Being that they would have to play Cleveland much more often. They'd have to play the Spurs much more often. Instead of playing the Spurs 4 times, they probably play them 3 times as many. So what would that be? 20 times or so. I don't know. During an 82-game schedule. At the time, I think it was an 81-game schedule. But I understand what Wilt's saying. The level of competition was much higher. And you had to play the best teams. Well, I don't know if they play them 20 times, but they would play the Spurs at least 10 times. You play everybody much more often. You play against the best because by there only being 10 teams, only the best would survive. So despite the fact that there were 10 teams, they wound up winning 68 ball games. Now, contrast that to the 72 Lakers, who did go 6-9-13. Almost everybody will tell you on that team that they didn't think that was the best team. They really overachieved. They just jailed as a unit, and they just were playing lights out basketball. But they all of them, Jerry West, Gail Goodrich, Happy Hairston, Wilt Chamberlain, they will all tell you that wasn't the best team that they ever played on. Or maybe Happy Harrison might say it was the best team. But the other guys may not say that's the best team they played on. Well, maybe Gail Goodrich might say it too. I don't know. But definitely Wilt and Jerry West. I know that. Because Jerry West felt like some of those other Laker teams were better than that team. But also, when the 72 Lakers won 69 games, the league had expanded to 17 teams at that time. I think they expanded to 17 teams. So, compared to the 68 win 76ers, they were playing a more diluted talent pool. So, that team ranks right up there. They were solid in every way. They were solid defensively. They were solid offensively. They had great balance. They had a tremendous bench. And they had a great coaching staff. And they were quite revolutionary putting Wilt in that position. And Wilt welcomed that role. And this role actually started a transition in his career from being primarily a scorer to becoming a scoring / passing big man, to being toward the end of his career just primarily a defensive rebounder, who was still a great passer. And I love looking at those highlights back in the I don't really see as many of those 60s and 70s games being aired as much, but many of you guys remember seeing Wilt throwing those bullet passes. I mean, he would throw the basketball. That's how strong this guy was. He would throw the basketball like a baseball down the court to a streaky man. It might be a Elgin Baylor. Well, yeah, maybe an Elgin Baylor or one of the guards or something like that, maybe a Jerry West. He would throw it, and that's how they would get these easy transitional buckets. But you don't see guys doing it anymore. The last team that I remember vividly seeing do that, and I'm just being honest, and probably not the last team, but one of the last teams I remember seeing throw those outlet bullet passes, Wes Unseld was really known for doing that. If you guys are a fan of that, look up some Wes Unseld highlights on YouTube, and the guy was a tremendous passer, passing big men as well. But the last team I remember frequently seeing that is those Rockets teams from the late 90s. I remember seeing Barkley doing that. Barkley would do that frequently. I'm telling you, man, Charles Barkley was a tremendous, tremendous player, man. But this is my video on the 67 Philadelphia 76ers, though, man. I think they're the greatest NBA team of all time. Of course, you guys might not agree with that. I know who Joe Bud thinks is the best team of all time. You don't have to write it, Bud. I already know, okay? I already know. But tell me what you guys think.